Elusive illuminescence allows Illuciferium. Forget what you know. What is God? What is perception and creation? Life, death, and the interface of illusion. Keep an open mind. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. However, if the Word was God, then what is the Word? What are words? These creative storytelling symbols make language, and it seems to be that the universal language is mathematics. This is a study of consciousness and its relation to nature through a mathematically complex system of measure known as God. Our formula must have a starting point, some sort of coordinate harboring all of the intelligence, hyper aware of its potential. This scintilla of creation is size definite. It is relative to itself, but most pertinent, its thought process and imagination. Be mindful, this graphic representation is actually an inaccuracy, as the white void and the black spheroidal coordinate are the omniscient omnipresence. But how can something like us come from something like this? This is us, and we are its masterpiece. Obviously, we chose to forget, and the Is-Us designed its omni-amniotic system of illuminescence, the omega point, fluxing with its subservient state of amnesia. So how does the Is-Us perform this peculiar game of hide and seek, this flowing from the all-knowing to which is known to be unknown? How does it breathe? What does it feel? The current mathematical approach to understanding how this system may function does not incorporate an intellect, a motive, but most importantly, consciousness. My objective was to simply find a conscious course between O and A, and this is how I found God. Let's slow it down a bit. Here's a flashback to high school geometry. The route between O and A has been labeled the radius, also known as R, due to the area of radiation between O and A. The radial distance has been defined as 1 because it is the singular focal length of this equation. The measurement between A and A through O is known as the diameter, also known as D, and has a value of 2. The measurement between A and A around O is known as pi, or this symbol, and can be defined by the total sum of radii needed to trace this arc, which when measured with linearity is the irrational number 3.14, and so on until forever. 2 pi, the almost full rotation of the circle, is known as Tau, or this symbol. These measurements are based on hypothetically bending the linear radii along the circumference of the circle. These never-ending numbers may seem to clarify irrationality in relation to infinity when studying the circle and sphere, though, when incorporating consciousness, I was forced to scrutinize how imperfect these conclusions actually were. What about 3.14 or 6.28 to infinity is of value to any mathematical equation seeking perfection? And even more specifically, this geometric structure, which has been entirely defined by the linear measurement of 1. The standard model of mathematics currently steers the narrative and suggests that 1 multiplied by Tau is the irrational 6.28. Though these conclusions were only drawn with lines of linearity, straight and direct routes of information, which has got me thinking. The simplicity of this programming leaves for only one possible route, and that is a sustained forward momentum. For all intensive purpose, the velocity of this duration is 1, absent of both acceleration and deceleration. And that's the logic, which makes me question the imagination's decision to move from O to A, and then to A again, and so forth. If these open-ended conclusions pi and tau stem from calculations associated with one specific radiating length between the omega point and its alpha state, then the current curriculum definitely neglects to explain how the system remains whole and in correspondence with itself. When you throw something through the air, it ends up loosely where you've aimed, depending on its weight and your accuracy, of course. And never will that object abruptly change 57-something degrees. in the effort to maintain perpetual balance with nature. An additional elementary principle of geometry is the 180-degree triangular structure, which in this particular equation is impossible to create, given the triradial length and angles based off of the pre-circumferal study. The imperfections of these irrational structures in absence of clarity as to how pi and tau must operate cyclically has led me to conclude that the current model deserves much more scrutiny. And this is a test of perception. There is an overlooked, opposite, and equally important element in this equation. What has occurred to me is that all linearity is simply the framework, and surfacing from insight, the circuitous arc, the mark within the omnigrid. Circuitousness is taking the longest possible route between 2 points that is non-linear. These arcs have a value of 1 because they are the singular focal length of this equation. We must think in repetitious values of 1. So how does our scintilla communicate with itself? There is a physics theory referred to as the third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, which will be applied here. If our data transfers from the omega point to its alpha state, we develop the diameter. This diameter is an expression of 2 polarized radii emanating from the omega point. One radius is equal to 1 degree, and there are 360 degrees in a circle. The current model treats these radii like deadly sharpened battle arrows sent swiftly from their bow's tightened string. Although arrows only go one way, we must think of these radii as boomerang, still sent with a purpose, but have response and feedback coded into this data transfer system. Not to mention, measuring curvature with perfectly straight lines seems slightly stunting, and when you recognize linearity for the simplicity of its coordination, the circuitous model flawlessly falls into place. The 90-degree arc marks its quadrant and has a value of 1. These exact arcs hold true to circuitousness when rerouted to the omega point, as they still hold a value of 1. These arcs certainly embody the characteristics of radii, and when routed back to the alpha state, completes the fractal cycle, leaving a 16th sized second dimensional clone, 64th sized in the third dimensional respect. This is a 3-phase system that obeys the laws of its counterpart. We must understand that the linear grid is the unconscious platform in which our conscious circuitous curved awareness explores. Simply bending your perception will allow you to pierce beyond the veil of mathematical illusion and come to terms with 2 opposite entities having the exact same value. This is the qubit, the metaphorical oystered pearl, the cube's polished sphere. The qubit is duality. It's a fractal singularity. It's infinity in a finite space, and its schematics are of a 3-tier protocol based off of the simple continued quartering of the targeted cuboidal area. This qubit continuously unfolds in equal and opposite measure forever, obeying the guidelines of course, and only takes a 1/3 reduction to uncover what we've learned to be the 16, or that would be 64 in a third dimensional respect, qubits that are necessary to factualizing creation. The omnigrid is entirely size relative to its specific tier. These icons are of equal value, coexisting in this mathematical matryoshka, fractaling forever. The 3-tier fractal system has left us with 4 specific measurements: the compass, merely the stage for its cast, and 3 lines of equal measure relative to their tier, consciously exploring their framework. Precisely. John 1:1. The elimination of irrationality from this equation, subletted by my curious, exploratory circuitousness, has altered the perception of pi and tau from their once irrational decimal-pointed numbers to the rational quadriratials based off of the flexible measurement of 1. The fluxing through this interface is by no means linear, and the substituted curved radii still equal 1, effectively redefining pi as 2 and tau as 4. Well, this particular perspective is absolutely necessary to absorb as our key for the understanding of the word God, as you will later see. due to the flawlessness of each ratio's unfolding into the next beginning, allowing for the infinite exploration within the confines of the down membrane. The cubit is the trinity, and the third unfolding inward reveals the quadratier, or tier shape, an incredibly important piece to this puzzle, known as phi, the golden ratio, or this symbol, A plus B equals C. In order to move forward, you must understand that consciousness can only be drawn and measured in circuitous lines. X, Y, and Z all equal 1 and are the routes of pi through the 64-qubit system. These circuitous arcs are how Tao uses pi to fold or unfold into another tier. This tier shape and its relative size to the harboring sphere consumes 1/12 of the circumferential distance. Each tier meets the next, totaling 12 30-degree sectors, and creates vector equilibrium. The three-phase gyroscope finds balance as the tiers slip into their special spaces, creating the perpetual balance pinned to the epicentral omega point. This flux is where the quadra-cuboidal fractal continues to breathe inward forever. And this discrete quantity of energy, proportional in magnitude to the frequency and radiation it represents, is the system in which quantum physics was built around. The study that accepts one miraculous catalysis they refer to as the Big Bang, but refuses to acknowledge spirit, and ultimately God. A deeper look at the structural pattern of this tier in relation to the qubit has made it very clear how this golden ratio is in fact an addition to Tao, due to its originating at the omega point, completing one full fractal cycle. But rather than mathematically collapse into itself, we see the ratio break free of the Tao membrane and continue its forever outward, equally expanding exploration. This golden ratio can be found everywhere in nature, and the Tao ratio is the omega point, which sits at the epicenter of all golden ratios. Tao is the trinity, an infinite three-phase reduction cycle, yielding two equally opposite clones at 1/64th the size of their predecessor, that remain mathematically whole and still relative to their individual self. This symbol was named the yin-yang, based off of the writings of the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu in 6th century BC. Yin to yang translates dark to bright, referring to the hill's shadowed, mossy overgrown northern slope, to its southern face, which catches every sunray thrown its way. The reality of Tao is duality. This is truly Tao's masterpiece, the golden ratio. A plus B equals C. The past combined with the present equals the future. And this system uses both measurements we've analyzed: unconsciousness expressed by the linear framework, and our conscious curved circuitous awareness. The sunflower's vibrant seed pod to the sliced nautilus shell, to every species existing on Earth that has unwillfully sustained consciousness and has effectively enabled a self-correspondence system. And to its credit, Tao, the conductor of the material matrix via tropical storm or stardust cluster, the creator of space and time, though absent of both, hides behind the curtain of metaphysical duality. This wizard, the mind gear, beautiful, yet a viciously psychoparasitic virus that with irrefutable evidence proves to be terminal. This amniotic psychosis weaved through illusion is the epitome of epidemia, the curse of death or awakening, however you choose to define breaching the interface. The connections between these mathematical patterns and nature are truly captivating and could be left at that. But what is even more bizarre is that we often see depictions of our cuboidal trinity bent at the lower stems of field crops, leaving them unharmed. It wasn't until the late 17th century that crop circles found their way into the history books, but the facts are is that these works of art have been stealthily appearing across moonlit dewy fields since. Of course, many have been faked and exposed. However, there is a definite, unmatchable meticulousness in the artistry associated with the more forthcoming messages that are likely to be of the same creator. I've come to a crossroads on this conclusion, and we either have an extremely talented individual or a group whom study the schematics of nature and secretly modify these crops. Or we may be experiencing responses to all the profoundly volatile experiences unfolding along the space timeline, creating memory and wisdom, some sort of response from the higher self, clues to the utopian balance in which it seeks. Nature is perfect and will have its way. It seems highly unlikely that these agricultural alterations surface from UFO steering aliens. I am convinced that there is only one extraterrestrial, the omni-amniotic system, and every creature of its imagination. This study of psycho-metaphysical geometric fusion proves that there is only one, that is really three: the Trinity, the seed of life, the seed to your life. So these fields may seem to be the perfect canvas for these abstract pieces of art, but the crops that rise from their dirt are no exemption to the laws of nature, and eventually fall victim to unconsciousness just like the rest. Not to mention that sooner than later the message will vanish, especially because of the farming aspect. We know nothing living lasts, and their short life expectancy has already been planned. So why choose the field? Seems likely that if you're a master crop circleist, the eventual harvesting of your canvas must be apparent. I sat with this, furthering my studies, and realized that the clues have been right before the eyes of this intelligent civilization of antiquity, and we have clearly missed the message. And maybe these crop circles are an attempt to grab our attention in a fresh way. We can find this historical message architecturally designed to precision across Earth's many abandoned megalithic sites, like at the Osirian Temple in Abydos, Egypt, where you'll find the divine pattern mysteriously laser-etched into the temple ruins. Under the paw of the Phuket, the Chinese guardian lion at the Yonghe Temple in Beijing, China. Stonehenge in Europe, Wiltshire, England. A bird's-eye view of the cuboidal monument leaves some sort of insight into the shadow catcher's motives. The more well-known site can be found in Africa at the Giza Plateau of Egypt. These skyscraping megaliths are aligned virtually perfect to Earth's magnetic north, and it's quite possible that the calculated error is in our system of measure, not theirs. The two larger pyramids are in perfect sync with the Tao protocol, and the smaller pyramid has been precisely offset, and a little investigation brings forth its very interesting location, along with some others on the plateau. Coordinates. This architectural design is validated by the constellation Orion, which was clearly part of this theme, guarded by another lion, the potentially recarved anthropomorphic Sphinx, watcher of the western sun. More ruins can be found in Central America, like the historic Mayan pyramids, and another very well hidden site off the coast of Japan. There is definitely cosmic inspiration applied to these structures that is indefinite to the laws of nature. From a raindrop to the tails of a galactic spiral. But why go through the trouble of building such megaliths? Was it to draw our attention to the fractal scale mathematics of nature? This study of the word God, the creative storytelling symbol or formula called God, is the coexistence of Tao and Phi, which creates what is known as toroidal flow. And when applying this algorithm to the coordinate, I have discovered irrefutable evidence that the creator of this formula chose to call it God, specifically to express their understanding of nature. This word clearly expresses the understanding of the singularity, or the quantum flux, the equal and opposite explosion and implosion of consciousness, spiraling out from its center, effectively creating the Trinity and memory bank. The first brushstroke to this matrix, the prequel to the book of Genesis, the first metabolic division of the seed of life, the seed to your life. The Word of God, first referred to as Yahweh, or the Tetragrammaton, analyzed with our newly designed pi and tau ratios, captures a second-dimensional schematic of the three-tier cuboidal trinity, emanating from the omega point, creating Phi, the golden ratio, and ultimately cloning itself. God moved upon the face of the waters, and with its word, said, "Let there be light." This cell division creates a shape known as the Vesica Piscis, the lens in which the Isus witnesses its glory. The graphic enhancement to Yahweh for the Word of God is the incorporation of the tier system to the already divine formula, expressed through the continuously drawn combination of curved and linear measurements, with the understanding of the circuitous values of pi and tau, and how they're relative to the golden ratio. G O D. God is a ratio. Pi is life. God is pi 7. No wonder why the illuminated worship the compass, square, and capital G. Life is but a dream of the lower selves. Elusive illuminescence allows Illuciferium.